this morning that you're not jealous of other folk, that you don't get in your feelings when other people are blessed, but I want to see somebody else make it. I want somebody else to have a testimony, because when I see someone else have a testimony, when I see somebody else get their breakthrough, it just is more confirmation that God is still on the throne. It might not be my turn yet. It might not be my time yet. It may not be my child who's getting saved, but God is still in the saving business. I may not be getting healed myself, but God is still in the healing business. Is there anybody here who don't mind seeing somebody else coming up and out of their situation? So it is that we see how this brother has individuals in his life that have the attitude that they want to see his life improved. That's what intercession is, my brothers and sisters. It means that we intervene where we can. It means that we help where we can to help someone else. Yes, it's good to pray for me, and God knows we need all the prayers we can get. It's good to have prayer teams and prayer calls and moments of prayer, because how many of you know that prayer is key? Prayer is essential. Jesus tells us that man shall always pray. But not only do I need your prayers, but sometimes I need you to lend a helping hand. Okay, y'all got quiet on that one. So sometimes you can't give me any money, but you can give me information. Sometimes you can't drive me to a place, but you point me in the direction where I can get some help. You can't help me, but you can't physically help me, but you point me in the direction where I can get the help. That's all a part of intercession. And so notice this, that not only do they take him physically, but they also pray on his behalf. The reason that I believe that they were able to pray on his behalf and they were able to intervene, that they were able to physically pull or to bring him to Jesus, was because they operated in the spirit of humility. Somebody say humility. It takes humility to watch somebody else come up. It takes humility for me to put myself on the back burner to make sure somebody else get to a place that I may never get to. Don't you know, my brothers and sisters, there are many of you in this place that you're walking in places, that you have positions, that you have opportunities that people help you get there, and they will never get there themselves. That requires humility. That requires selflessness. That requires being willing to put myself on the back burner so that I can help somebody else get to where they need to get to. But not only does it require humility, but the spirit of intercession also requires us to put ourselves in someone else's shoes. Sometimes you got to put yourself in another man's shoes. Sometimes you have to move away out of your entitlement and out of our entitlement. And we have to say, you know what, that could be me. That could be me without. That could be me in this predicament. That could be me in this situation. That could be my wife. That could be my husband. That could be my child. And when we recognize that it could be us, that it could be us who are going through, it could be us who are dealing with this dilemma, when we recognize that it could be us, thank God it's not us, but it could be us, it moves me to intercede and intervene for someone else. But oh no, we're comfortable. We're comfortable with me and mine. We're comfortable in our big houses, driving our fancy cars, working at our prestigious jobs. But is there anybody here who recognizes that somebody else's situation could be your situation, but by the grace of God? And the reason you see me praising God is because I recognize that I might not have everything that I want. I might not have everything that I desire, but it could be worse off. That my life could be worse off. I could be like this man in the text. But my brothers and sisters, listen here. Intercession is so powerful that God, he does not forget you in the process. That when you intercede and intervene on somebody else's behalf, when you help and not hinder, when you push and not get in the way, when you begin to make sure that things happen for other people rather than putting traps in their way, don't you understand that God, he'll bless you too? Because Ephesians 6 and 8 says it like this. It says that whatever you do, and I'm paraphrasing it, but you can read it later. But in Ephesians 6 and 8, it says it like this, that if whatever you do for someone else, God will make happen for you. The text actually says that when you do good to others, that God will do good to you. And is there anybody here this morning who says some of the blessings that I'm walking in right now is because I did good for somebody else? Some of the things that God has done and some of the doors that God has blessed me to enter into is because I helped somebody else. And I want to tell somebody here this morning that when you intercede for somebody and when you help somebody else, don't you feel like it's in vain? Don't you feel as though that God is not paying any attention, because God has a blessing for you. Keep doing good even when it doesn't seem like good is happening to you, because God, he's watching. God, he's keeping track. And one day God is going to show up in your life and he's going to do exceedingly abundantly above all that you could ask or think, because you helped someone else. And so notice this, that these individuals, they operated in the spirit of intercession. But notice this in verse 33. The Bible says that after they asked Jesus, or they begged Jesus to lay his hand on them, notice in verse 33 it says, so he took him away from the crowd in private. So he took him away from the crowd in private. The second thing that I want to lift in this text is the placement in isolation. Not only do we see the power of intercession, but we see the placement in isolation. Jesus took the deaf man away from the crowd. He took him away from the crowd, and the text says in private. He was isolated, if you will. Now, something that we need to understand about isolation does not always mean you are alone, but it can also mean that you have been separated from a group with a limited number of people in your space or your context. From reading the text, Reverend Owens, we're not sure that if it was him and Jesus alone, or if it was Jesus and the man's friends who brought him to Jesus. But what we do know from the text, by reading the text, is that Jesus isolated the man from the crowd. Different commentators argue why Jesus pulls the man away from the crowd. Some suggest that it was to symbolize Jesus pulling the man away from the world or from worldly things. Another commentator suggests that Jesus was pulling the man away from distractions or anything that could disturb what Jesus was about to do. Another commentator suggests that perhaps Jesus was pulling the man from the crowd so that the man would not be overwhelmed by the noise when his ears were open. I could agree with all of the commentators' viewpoints. But while we do not clearly understand why Jesus pulls the man away from the crowd, I do understand the idea or the concept of isolation. I do understand that there are those moments and there are those seasons in life when it seems that we have been isolated and God has shrunk our circle for a season, that he shields us from distractions and he allows us to focus on what the Lord is doing in our life. Sometimes, my brothers and sisters, we need to be isolated. Sometimes we need to be pulled away from the crowd so that God and the Holy Ghost can have a one-on-one with us. Do I have any witnesses here? Wasn't it Jacob who was isolated? Yeah. Wasn't it Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane? He was isolated. Y'all not gonna talk to me here. Sometimes you need some moments of isolation so that God can work in us and so that God can work on us. And there are some of you here this morning who says, I know what isolation feels like. People can't relate. People don't understand. I try to tell them what I'm going through. They don't seem to understand what I'm going through. I try to get people to come along with me, and it seems like they don't want to go along with me. It's because God, He has you exactly where He wants you to be so that He can do what He wants to do in your life. And can I tell you, my brothers and sisters, in isolation, you're not going to die. In isolation, you're not going to go crazy. In isolation, you're not going to be forgotten about because God knows exactly where you are and God knows exactly what you're doing. Sometimes we need to be isolated so we can hear what God is saying. Sometimes we need to be isolated so that we can see what God is doing. And I know that we live in this time where we are socially, that it's not popular to be by ourselves. That socially we always have to have a crowd. But do I have anybody here who says that if I don't have a crowd around me, that as long as I got Jesus, I'll be all right? I know you got to have